Hi, and welcome to Journey Forward with Jory Rose, where you will gain insights, tools, and inspiration to get unstuck and live your best life. Jory is a licensed marriage and family therapist with a passion for helping people cultivate awareness and authenticity so they can show up fully in all aspects of their life. And now, here's Jory.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Journey Forward with Jory Rose. I'm here with Beth Somich this morning, and I am so looking forward to this conversation. Even in just our few minutes before hitting record, I know that we're going to have a lot to share with you guys. So Beth, please welcome to the show. I would love for you to introduce yourself and share your journey of how you got to where you are and why you're passionate about doing what you do.
First, thank you for having me. I am a licensed therapist in North Carolina. I have been practicing for, almost close to 10 years now. And I really specialize in focusing on family dynamics, particularly with millennials. And so now I own a group private practice. I also mentor other therapists and try to promote this idea of modern mental health, which really means being accessible and relatable and relevant to your clients, really meeting them on their level. Without this kind of hierarchical professional client relationship. It's more, there's a baseline, and it's much more relatable that way. And I find that it's more healing that way.
It is
for sure.
Mm-hmm. How did you get on the journey of becoming a therapist, and especially working with teens and millennials? And that was a sweet spot that you wanted to connect around. What was your own journey that led you there?
Yeah, so I grew up in a town in very rural New York, almost on the border of Vermont, and there were almost no mental health resources available to people. And it was very evident in the community, both on an individual and a systemic level. And that's when I really created an interest in it. I started reading Psychology Today as a teenager rather than Cosmopolitan or Teen Magazine, and just took a huge interest in it and decided this is what I want to do. So I was one of those people that was very fortunate to know this is the path that I am kind of called to and following. Mm-hmm. And that's what I did. And I started out working with more children, which I still love working with children, but I realized I was really working with parents when I was working with them. And almost just wanted to get those parents in my office more often. I felt like it could move the needle even further that way.
100%. That's why I stopped working with kids.
Yes. So
it can be a little bit disheartening with young kids not feeling like you have, or that they have enough agency in the home to move that needle, to make those systemic changes. So I really appreciate people who focus on working with kids, because it's not always an easy population, because I know I just wanted to wrap them all up and take them home and not send them home to these shitty households. That was my empathy, just was on overdrive.
Absolutely. And teens were really a sweet spot for me because they were in such a time of transition in their lives. Mm-hmm. Now, in the context of family therapy, I specialize in what's called enmeshment. And many people don't know that term, but what it represents is a lack of boundaries within the family system. And the opposite of enmeshment is differentiation. And differentiation is supposed to happen in adolescence. And so I love facilitating healthy differentiation to avoid this enmeshment that usually causes problems in adulthood in terms of lacking boundaries, lacking independence, lacking a sense of self, lacking direction, over seeking validation from family members. And I think it's really a generational issue as well.
Before we go further, because I know we have so much more to talk about, I want to pause here on this enmeshment and differentiation. I've been fascinated by enmeshed family systems because I've been a part of one almost my whole life, where differentiation, individuation, healthy developmental independence was not supported, not really allowed. It was looked down upon as a violation to the silent spoken value system and, rules of where I came from. And that was rooted in trauma. So I always understood it. Mm-hmm. But nevertheless, it was really difficult to be in. And at 45 years old, I'm still practicing differentiation in a healthy way. So this is not only stuck in adolescent. For all those out you listening, and there could be a variety of reasons in which family systems create these lack of boundaries. So
Oh, yeah.
can we talk a little bit more about if maybe even adults who recognize, oh my gosh, now I have a word to put on what I
Yes.
experience, because sometimes we don't even have the language to use. So having language helps define our experience and give it greater context and room to exist. So can we just go in a little bit more? You said it briefly, but I really want to give some space to this because, and then we talked a little bit pre-recording about COVID. I think that, there's an inverse thing that I'm observing with my clients and my colleagues' clients, in which adolescents aren't wanting to individuate as much, and their failure to launch because it's too comfortable within the system and the world is overwhelming or seems too difficult to get footing in socially, financially, academically, romantically, otherwise. So what would you say to all that? Because I just dropped a lot there.
Sure. Yeah. So first I have a quiz, and maybe we can drop it in the show notes. Is my family enmeshed? And it points out all of these indicators that you may not have really.
I'm going to take the quiz, Mary Beth.
Yeah, sure. Go right ahead.
My own family of origin.
Absolutely. And then there's actually some prompts that you can use. So I can definitely link those resources. But
I would love that.
Many people do really have this light bulb moment. And sometimes it comes in adulthood. Many times my clients will seek me out, new clients will seek me out when they're in the transition into getting married or being newly married, because that is the most threatening time for an enmeshed family system, is losing their child to a spouse or a partner, because there's all of this emotional dependency on the children and as far as the parent goes. And that can absolutely stem in trauma, like you had mentioned. What I notice across the board is that there's typically an instability in the parent's marriage that leads the parent, usually the mother, if we're talking
generalizing,
if we're generalizing, usually the mother is getting her emotional needs met through her children because she's not getting them met through her romantic partner. And then when they go off and find their own person, romantic partner, whoever it is, that is threatened, and it creates issues in the system. And that's where you see this overbearing mother-in-law narrative or monster-in-law narrative coming out. And just expectation setting in terms of, are we spending every holiday with your family, or are we sharing? And that kind of dynamic that really comes up.
These create such tricky waters. And, to your point of the enmeshed system, often as a result of a parent not getting their own adult needs met by their own cohort, for lack of a better word, whether it's partner or even friend. Because I was raised by a single mom who was never in partnership after I was about 3 years old, except for some short little stints. And how dare we children go do off and live our own lives? Right. And the guilt and the resentment, that the children feel, and the resentment from the kind of the top down, it's a really big challenge. And so I think you're right when and even going off to college can create some of those systemic changes, or a child moving further away. So what do you do when you're the kid or the adolescent or the young adult in those moments of transition, when healthy boundaries are not supported? And communication likely isn't stellar, because it may have been some communication issues that led to such patterns being developed to begin with, because no one was afraid to speak their truth. So what are some solid tools people can do there?
Well, one is, of course, seeking support. So through therapy, through mental health coaching. I do enmeshment coaching for people out of state who really just want to focus on enmeshment, because therapy is regulated by state licensure. So I do some of that. I think seeking support in that way, and community, and acknowledging that there are other people going through the same dynamic, or at least a similar one. And boundaries are really at the core of this work. Setting healthy boundaries that really should have been established during adolescence, during that time of healthy differentiation, that window that was likely missed. If there are elements of enmeshment and codependence, that it's not too late, right? And it's going to be a rough road to set boundaries with a parent who has never accepted them or even supported them. but it is possible.
One of the things that I have found helpful as an adult is to seek support through family members who have healthy boundaries family systems, like aunts and uncles or
Sure.
cousins in that way. And that has been really helpful to be like, oh, wait, there is someone who sees what a healthy dynamic looks like, to validate that what I'm doing isn't wrong by creating some individuation and space.
Yes. And another way I reframe it to people is, as long as you're in that enmeshed system, you're almost enabling the other person to not seek out other supportive relationships in their life if they're always dependent upon you for their emotional needs being met. So that reframe can help some of my clients realize that they're actually enabling potentially their parents and not allowing them to branch out and maybe seek partnership or friendship or anything else.
Yeah, I think that's huge. It's such a challenge. And what would healthy differentiation look like? So if someone's not sure, am I in mesh? Like, what would they need to know to say, no, wait, these are actually really healthy boundaries?
Yeah,
So what would be some examples of that?
Well, first, I think the biggest issue is that my enmeshed clients really struggle to identify what their wants and needs even are, because they've been predetermined for them. And so that's a whole process in itself, is even connecting with what are your wants and needs, and then being able to assert them. I also coach through this 3-step boundary setting blueprint. It's almost like a script of, first, you're going to validate the person. Let's say it's mom. Mom, I love when you do this. I really appreciate your presence in my life. The second is to use I statements to really assert your need and the outcome you'd like, and even explain why. Like, I need some protected time and space during the hours of whatever to get my job done. And I cannot answer I will not answer your phone calls during that window because it impacts my ability to do my job, whatever it is. And then the third step is to really come toward, I can call you on Thursdays at 6 after work on the way home, right? Something that you are okay with. And sometimes there's actually not something that you are okay with offering. But in this case, like a phone call, you can determine when and how long and how often. And just as an example.
I love that. And the validation piece is one that I think people often overlook. I have a phrase that I work with my clients in which I often say validation, then rationalization. Like, we need to speak to the emotion before the logic. We need to get to the point of connection and empathy and compassion before we're trying to get to the point of reason. Because if we just skip that, then we miss the point of really connecting and ultimately trying to meet everybody's needs.
You get so much further in the conversation when you engage them in that way, rather than coming at them like, you never do this. You're always interrupting, right? That all or nothing thinking doesn't really get you anywhere.
No. And I love the coming towards. It makes me think there's the quote in Brene Brown's book, Atlas of the Heart. And I always forget the guy's name who says the quote. I really should have that one down because I talk about it a lot. When he talks about boundaries are not just telling someone what you can't do, but it's telling someone what you can. So boundaries are a way of loving you and the other person at the same time. And I love that because it's so easy to think of a boundary as like a stop sign. Like, nope, can't do that. Hands up, nope, I'm not available for that. But I love that languaging of, I'm not available for this. However, I am available for this.
Yeah. That's a great reframe, that positive reframe, because someone asked me how I would define boundaries once, and I came up with this idea of they protect your peace. That's really what they are. They protect your peace. And they also protect your relationships because they prevent resentment from building in them.
And it's so easy to build. Resentment is one of those things that can just sneak up on you and not realize, because it's like the little paper cuts, right? So they're not enough to really say something about, they're not enough to focus on every time one of them happens, but the accumulation can end up being like, shit, I didn't realize I had all these little slights that now feel like big, rifts in a relationship or in even just how you think about the relationship.
Yeah. And it reminds me of passive communication. So I look at it as a spectrum, right? With passive on one end and then aggressive on the other end. And in the middle, we have this healthy assertiveness. But so many people are living in passive and just letting it go, that eventually they might snap over the smallest thing and just jump over assertive into aggressive. And that's where you get passive aggressive. And that's when, you snap and someone's like, what's wrong with you?
Like, where did that come from?
Yeah, and so frustrating. And so doing some assertiveness coaching and helping people communicate there in that healthy, assertive middle ground by setting boundaries. And I think you have to become, or I know you have to become familiar with your wants and your needs to be able to be there in that healthy assertiveness.
Well, and I think it's an interesting thing you brought up, because someone who, let's say a teen or a late adolescent, young adult who isn't in a mesh system, it would seem to me that a big piece of this, and I focus on mindfulness. So to me, mindfulness, the one word answer is simply awareness, right? So it would seem that someone who's really enmeshed, because they have been such in an enmeshed system, may not know where they start, someone else ends, may not know what their needs or wants, their desires are in order to actually create the boundary that they're seeking. So where do you get that beginning step of how to guide self-awareness, self-curiosity to even not just be reactive to say, well, I don't like how it is, but what would I want it to be like otherwise, right? Like,
yeah, there's definitely some visioning that happens, and really being able to attune to yourself and separate from another person. This is especially hard for people who identify as codependent with their family members. And
can you give a definition on that? Because I think sometimes the word codependent may get overused without a proper description. So for the sake of this conversation, what is your definition of codependence?
Yeah, the simplest way that I discuss codependence with my clients is asking the question, are you okay if they're not okay?
Mm-hmm.
And can that be separated? Can you tolerate the discomfort of another person? Or do your emotions really, or do their emotions really dictate your own, I guess?
Yeah, one of the ways I'll describe it is feeling the need to put someone else's need ahead, somebody else's needs ahead of your own.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And
having that be the expected pattern. So when you deviate from that pattern, now you're changing the rules of the game.
Yep.
And that generally is not allowed very easily.
And you can see the overlap here between codependence and enmeshment, because enmeshment is all about these unwritten rules and not rocking the boat and keeping whoever is kind of head of the family happy. Some terms that come up often are, well, this is how it's always been, and this is how we're going to do it. And not embracing a curiosity of, well, what might work for this other person, or what might be a different method or alternative to the way it's always been done. And who is that serving?
Right. And sometimes it might take some creative reframing too. And I don't like to think things are manipulative when we're reframing, because it really is, what is another way we can look at this in which both of our needs can get met and we're both feeling good about this situation? Because if there's resentment in the way, then how good is the relationship if we're spending all this time together enmeshed and codependent, but we're all unhappy?
Exactly.
That's not closeness. That's not relational in the terms that we were actually seeking.
Yep, you're absolutely right. And what I tell clients too in the navigating of that, in the discussion that is often very new to enmeshed families of how can all of our needs get met, or both of our needs, or some of our needs, is if someone is pushing back on your boundary, consider it validation that it really needed to be set.
Yeah.
Rather than just being engulfed in fear or intimidation by that, like really taking it as validation.
Say that again, because I think it's such an important statement, and people are so afraid to draw boundaries. No one's ever going to say, thank you so much for drawing that boundary. So say what you said again, because I really want to give that some space.
Yeah. So if someone is pushing back on your boundary, consider it validation that it really needed to be set. You are on the right track, because someone who respects the boundaries respects and cares about you too.
I love that, because we can look at the pushback as, oh, I'm wrong, I'm doing something, quote, bad. it could play into a narrative. Perhaps you're the scapegoat in the family system. That's always the problem. So it's a beautiful reframe.
Yeah. Yeah. I do find that my clients feel more validated, especially, you're right, the clients that have been targeted as the scapegoat in the family.
Yeah. So when you work with the teens or the adolescents who are in the midst of this, I imagine it feels pretty overwhelming to them in the beginning of, can I ever change this system?
And teens are often so early in it that it's very possible to do so, because that's more of like a hand holding through the differentiation process rather than a
Yeah.
repeating of something that never happened. So that's what I love about working with teens, is that I can kind of be a bridge and help guide that happen and normalize it for the parents and help
Yeah.
them walk through the threatening piece of it if they are codependent or enmeshed. And it's hard for parents, and I'm a parent myself, and I give them credit. Like, it is hard, I think, naturally to be a parent and to watch your child differentiating, but it's also normal and healthy. And maybe they can receive some support around navigating that transition.
Yeah. I recently was talking to a mother who, the teenage daughter has been really unhappy living at home and actually asked to go to away to boarding school. And I thought that was really good advocacy on her part to recognize this isn't a healthy situation for me. I think I can do better somewhere else. And the way it was received from the parent was personal, really hurtful.
How could you
You
do
know,
this?
like that, and I think that really is a hard thing for that. I witness teens and parents getting stuck in, is parents over personalizing their child's individuation. Look at all that I've done for you. Look at all that I give you. Why aren't you more grateful? Why do you want to move away? Why don't you want to be with me more? Like, it's so I know that not taking things personally, we know it's one of the big four agreements, right? But we know it's also one of the hardest to not personalize that. Wait, someone else's experience might be different than mine. And can I let that be okay?
Yeah. And in a healthily structured system, it's, the parent's needs are not at the center, right? It's not about the parent. The child is not there to, make the parent feel better. It's not on the same level. Even like, one of the red flags of enmeshment that I'll see is, let's say mothers and daughters, like calling each other my best friend. Right. Like, that's sweet. And like, I see the kids' t-shirts like mommy's best friend. And I'm like, oh no, like, you're not on the same level. A best friend has an emotional responsibility to you that your child should never have. It's not the same. Or mommy's little boyfriend on a little boy's shirt. And I'm like, nope, that responsibility is on her partner, not on her. So I get that, people are trying to be cute, but I'm like, do we conceptualize what this is really saying? Like, burden.
It is. And it's interesting. I have two daughters. They're almost 20 and 17. And my daughters and I are super, super close. And we've often said, like, we feel like sisters at times. We do feel like really good friends. And yet, but we still have the role of mom. And that comes first. So it's like, I think you can be friends with your adult teenage kids, but without an established hierarchy of, but I'm still the mother. And here's what that dynamic looks like. And the reciprocity is not always going to be equal. And that's okay. And when we get confused on those lines, let's get clear about them.
Yep, exactly. I would agree with that. Yeah.
And I think to do it without awareness and just to think, oh, we're buddy, it negates the role dynamic.
And we don't really have a great word for a close but healthily structured system. Like, I think that's why
we've got plenty of words to describe the unhealthy system or the dysfunctional system. So I think we should come up with that, Mary Beth. I think we should figure out how to coin a term that really highlights and gives a visual of a really intact, healthy system. I think that could be big for us.
I think so too. Yeah, I agree. Because that's why we're pulling at other words that they don't totally fit, or they're not totally appropriate, because we don't really have that word.
Yeah. So I know I paused you a long time there on the enmeshment and differentiation, but I think it's really important. And I also think since COVID, we've kind of mentioned that differentiation is hard to know. Is this a social developmental delay of kids who aren't wanting to get their driver's license? I see a lot of teens who are like, I don't care to drive. Like that wasn't
Right.
like the case when I was a kid. I don't know what it was like when you were a kid, but that was a rite of passage we all were counting down the days for because it led to more freedom,
Mhm.
right? And independence. And yet it's hard to know when we had so much time at home, the world became a scarier place. What are you seeing, just if at all, the impact of social delay or developmental delay socially, right?
Mhm.
As being confused by not differentiating, or is this an actual social phenomenon that we're going to have to attend to, therapeutically for in our careers in a different way?
Sure. I think healthy differentiation really comes from a regulated place. And if
Mm-hmm.
our nervous systems are stuck in fight or flight and we feel a fear and we feel a threat, it's really hard to go through that process.
Yeah.
You're going to cling to the people closest to you. You're going to feel less independent, right? And I think to your point, COVID really put people in fight or flight, and I'm not sure they've totally come out of it. I've even
Yeah.
noticed like pop culture trends changing in that direction. Like I will turn on Netflix and like 80%, well, not say every, but maybe like 85, 90% of the shows are very dysregulating, right? Like fear mongering.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of been this cultural shift almost in that direction and just keeping us in this sympathetic fight or flight state. And so I think that is
Yeah.
working against healthy differentiation.
Yeah. It's really hard, and the road seems a little bit harder to get footing,
Mhm.
1 foot ahead of feeling like I can thrive in this versus merely just survive. I have a lot of compassion for the young adults who are just beginning now, of the competition seems harder, the challenges socially seem, bigger. And I've read research around even for, young women, the challenge of not having suitable marriage quality men to
Mm,
equal their intelligence, their drive. Like women are kind of surpassing men in college attendance and in academics. And it's a problem. It's going to be really interesting for this upcoming generation to find suitable partners because there's been an imbalance in the genders there. It's an interesting challenge.
yeah, that is interesting. I'd be interested in reading some of that research too.
Yeah, my fiance, he works with men. He's a psychologist, and he guides men in greater emotional awareness and communication and how to be happy, not just successful. Because the way that men are raised in the man box, right, it shuts down 2/3 of their emotional spectrum,
Mhm.
and it's perhaps great for business, but not really great for partnership. And then you have the phenomena of gaming so much where majority of men more than women who are in the gaming who are in front of a screen, and yes, they're talking to other people during, but they don't have to make eye contact, and the social skills have gone way down. And there's also a great fear of rejection, and there's not much of a motivation for money or for sex because they have porn at their fingertips and they've got parents who aren't pushing them out of the house. So it's like, what's the motivation if you're not motivated to make money and you're not motivated to have sex because you can kind of get your needs met virtually to some extent? It's creating a really interesting. So he works with a lot of young adolescent male to get them out of the parents' house, off the gaming, increasing social skills, increasing emotional awareness, increasing risk taking interpersonally. Because the
Yeah.
fear of rejection is so strong because actually men are highly more sensitive than we give them credit to.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm looking
So
at as parents, like, I don't think I'd be okay with an adult son playing video games living in my house.
no.
Maybe in some world, but I don't know. Not
Yeah.
sure about that one.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So aside from, because I really paused you there like 20 minutes ago on the
Oh, yeah.
enmeshment and differentiation piece, we talked in the beginning about the modern mental health routines, making it more relatable and accessible. How else are you able to, in your work or, with your passion of what you're doing, what tools are you focusing really with those population that you're working with? And for any parents who are out there listening, this is kind of the jump I wanted to make is maybe what are some tips or tools you can give parents who have kids of that age that maybe they could start planting some seeds and give some insight?
Yeah. Well, the place that teens and young adults and millennials are really connecting with mental health is social media right now.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to convince your child to go on social media these days
No,
on it.
no.
So that's where I'm meeting them. And our practice focuses on that population, and that's where we're meeting them. So my Instagram account, Your Journey Through, is really focused on speaking to that population directly
I
and
love that.
offering them resources. In my bio, I have different resources for enmeshment, for boundary setting, for really a lot of different things. And during the pandemic, actually, is when I noticed this huge boom in terms of mental health need and a lack of support. Every therapist I knew had a wait list.
Oh my gosh. That was my client
Yeah.
load more than doubled during COVID. It was
Yeah.
a difficult time.
Absolutely. And so what I did was create Insta Growth for Therapists, which is my course for therapists who want to establish a social media presence so that they can really connect with their clients in that way and help their ideal clients, find them on social media and know that they exist. And so now that's a community of more than 250 therapists who have really grown.
Amazing.
Yeah. And it's so rewarding to me to see them growing and connecting with the perfect clients for them and just establishing that. So yeah, social media has not only been a great marketing tool, but really a way to help destigmatize mental health.
And I do feel like this generation is so much more forgiving and so much more open to talking about what they're experiencing versus when we were kids, whether it's anything on the LGBTQ plus, range, whether it's any neurodivergent range. I mean, I do have to say, I feel like there's a lot more challenges kids are facing these days. And perhaps it's not more, it's just being so openly talked about and so well accepted, right? And so as hard as it is in this time and era, I do feel that they are being the word I was gonna say is well groomed. I don't think that fits the right word, but they are in a space in which it does feel there's more societal acceptance and support through naming their own mental health struggles. Wherever it is that they're facing, they're going to find more camaraderie around it than feeling more isolated, like when we were kids.
Yeah. Yeah. There's definitely an element of relatability amongst generation. And also I think that's expanding into other generations too, as it's becoming more and more normalized and challenging other generations to say, okay, now I'm getting curious about this. Let me learn more about this. And I love seeing.
So one last question before we wrap up, because again, I think the majority of my audience is going to be more of the parents of, young adults and adolescents. What would you advise parents who have the curiosity of, oh shit, I think I've raised really enmeshed kids and I really have some core boundaries myself? Where do you think you might give some insight for parents to self-reflect or tools that they can start getting curious about so that they can be a contributing factor to some more healthy dynamics in the own system that perhaps they've contributed to creating?
Yeah, at that point, it really comes down to boundary setting with your kids and exploring how healthy you are with doing that and what obstacles there are for you in doing that, whether they're emotional or they're logistical or financial. And I think exploring that with a therapist or coach is a really important and helpful thing to do. And then assessing what your supports are and what your kids' responses to that are, because it's definitely a process. But I love to see parents exploring how they are contributing to their children's outcomes, behaviors, etc.
Yeah. And again, I'm going to come back and say from my lens, it all comes back to self-awareness.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And we think we're aware, but we're not often as aware as we think.
Yes. One of the hardest things for me to hear is someone to say, well, I don't need therapy because I already know everything. I'm like, then you absolutely need therapy. If you have that
Yes.
belief, then there is so much to learn because I can't ever know everything about myself.
Well, and even if perhaps we did have this belief we knew a lot about ourselves, we keep growing and changing. So we're always evolving. So do we know ourselves at the new level of where we're at than maybe where we were a few years ago, especially as parents, because I know each age brings a different stage and different emotional context and different interrelational context. And I'm at this point in my motherhood journey, and I've been divorced for 9 years and I've had the majority of the custody. So hence partly why my girls and I are so close, because I've had them almost, over 80% of the time. And this is a really fascinating piece for mothers. And I'm actually going to be doing more work around this, is the transition of, I don't like the word empty nesting because I don't think it's ever really empty, but it's how to shift my identity as a mom and my own role as a woman when I am not attending to day-to-day parenting, and to be able to, I'm almost having this reverse differentiation right now with my college age daughter. And it's kind of fascinating because she and I are super close, and I'm actually needing a little bit more space from her than she's needing from me. And so it's kind of this reverse boundary setting of like, honey, I love you, but you don't need to FaceTime 4 times today.
Yeah.
And she's in college halfway across the country. So I respect that there's a desire to connect. And yet I'm like, mama needs some time.
Yes. And it's a similar idea of what are we enabling, right? Looking at that. Like if we set the boundary and we said once a day is good enough, would she go and hang out with her friends more rather than be on FaceTime? And would that be good for her? Right. So these boundaries can be reframed very healthily.
Yes. And that's I think an ongoing conversation of what are your needs, what are my needs? Let's try to meet each other in the middle. Because if we're overstepping someone's needs, that's again where that resentment is going to build.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Mary Beth, I love this conversation. It's not one that I've had on the podcast. So this is really fresh and I think really applicable, especially as we enter into, the new school year, and there's a lot of transition happening. And every school year is a different age and stage of development for both, teen and parent. And for any of those parents out there who, just had kids head off to college, we're in transition everywhere.
Yeah,
And
there's so many transitions like that. Yeah.
There's so much going on. And I love that we really delved into the enmeshment differentiation piece, because it's not language I think people really recognize. I think they just feel the negative results of it and then have no idea what to do about it. And then it just carries on into when, children have children. And I can't tell you how many of my clients have the same story of when they gave birth, their husband did not have the ability to set a boundary for his mother, not either being in the delivery room or coming into the room too soon after the baby was born, because that's what the grandmother wanted. And the husband did not have the ability to set the boundary to say, that's not what my wife wants, or that's not what my wife and I want. And from moment one of a grandchild being born, that resentment is built, and it gives the boundary that it's okay for the grandmother to step in whenever she desires, without regard for the new set of parents, or even just sometimes the grandkid.
That's a very common story for sure.
That story is, I have countless number of clients who have had a variation of that dynamic. And so, to those of you listening, I know Mary Beth would agree to, the sooner you can create healthy boundaries, it's going to benefit everyone moving forward.
Including your marriage, because it is possible to get a spouse on board.
Yeah, I absolutely. And it's a value set that you want to be able to share, right?
Yeah.
Definitely. So Meredith, I love this conversation. Thank you so much for sharing what you do and giving us some insight on some tools around how to get out of these challenging dynamics. How can people find you? I know you mentioned a few moments ago your Instagram, your journey through, which we'll have the link. And we'll also put the link in the show notes for your assessment, because I think that would be a wonderful resource for people to be able to have access to. But anything else you'd like to share of how people can find you or if they want to work with you?
Yeah, so my website is yourjourneythrough.com, where you can inquire or book an appointment. And then I also have a website for therapists who are looking for different tools to grow on social media through my courses, consulting, and other kind of free resources. And that's instagrowthfortherapists.com.
Beautiful. We will have all of those in the show notes. And if this episode spoke to you, I encourage you guys to give a rating, a review, a share, so we can help others journey forward to having healthy boundaries and personal boundaries and healthy family dynamics, because that can ripple effect out into the world, which we all so desperately need. So thank you so much, Mary Beth. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, take care and be well.
To continue your journey forward, find Jory Rose on Facebook and Instagram to become part of her growing community. You can also gain access to her meditations, books, online classes, or to sign up for an upcoming retreat. Visit her at joryrose.com. That's JOREEROSE.com.